It's October. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of horror. It's been my favorite genre for the past few years. I can't get enough of it. This video is a surprise Halloween treat for everybody. My patrons get first dibs at voting on which topics I'll do for upcoming videos, with the next one being a focus on Steven Universe. Stay tuned for that. I did not want to miss out on Spooky Month, so here is a chill, exploratory video about Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, plus the adaptations that came from it. Shirley Jackson wasn't just a novelist, but she was mostly known for the titles that she wrote from the 1940s to the 1960s. I knew nothing about her work, and although I'd heard of The Lottery, her most famous story, I never read it or any of her other stories. Most of my high school English curriculum had been taken up by Shakespeare plays, The Crucible, The Scarlet Letter. Seriously, don't ask me what else we did in high school English class. Those are the only titles I remember ever having homework on. Fast forward to 2018, when I watched Netflix's Haunting of Hill House TV series, and it changed my life. It is by far the most well-rounded, impactful piece of horror media I've ever consumed. I know that YouTubers love to make a hyperbole of everything, but I can say for sure that I will never forget how gorgeous and amazing this series was. As soon as I realized it had been based off of a story from a woman writer from the 50s who wrote horror, I sprinted to the bookstores. The first book of Shirley Jackson's that I bought was The Bird's Nest, which had beautifully complex writing. Maybe a slightly outdated storyline by today's standards, but it was a fascinating read. I didn't actually get around to reading the original Haunting of Hill House book until last month. I went in expecting it to be just like the TV show, and no, the TV show is an entirely different story from the original novel. It certainly is loosely based on it, and it has some similar themes, but oh my gosh, it's a complete separate entity. On top of that, I found out about the other adaptations of the book. 2 movies, a black and white one from 1963, and an insanely ridiculous one from 1999. So you know I have to talk about all of it, the book, the movies, and the TV series. There was also a play, but I don't think I can find footage of a play from 1964, so I'm just not going to cover the theatrical part of the adaptations. So let's talk about Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. The novel was originally published in 1959, and it was Shirley's second to last gothic horror novel before her death. My copy was a very trim 233 pages long, so not that thick of a book. It can be finished in pretty much one day, but it fits a surprising amount of plot inside. My copy of the book has an eerie graphite drawing for the front and back cover. It depicts the main character, Eleanor, looking away and holding a handwritten letter. She's terrifying. Her limbs are extremely exaggerated, and her conservative clothing kind of drags out the length of her body, emphasizing just how gangly she is. On the back of the book is a forest with the tiniest hint of Hill House peeking out in the corner, nonchalant, like it's not perhaps the main antagonist of the story. On the inside cover flap is a fun little surprise, a picnic blanket with plates scattered and the vague body of a woman lying on the ground. The opposite flap on the backside is a continuation of the picnic blanket, along with a basket of food. Already, there are mysteries here. Does someone die in this book? What is the house in the background? What's the significance of the picnic blanket and the letter? The synopsis inside reads, quote, 4 seekers have arrived at the rambling old pile known as Hill House. Dr. Montague, an occult scholar looking for solid evidence of psychic phenomena, Theodora, his lovely and lighthearted assistant, Luke, the adventurous future inheritor of the estate, and Eleanor, a friendless, fragile young woman with a dark past. As they begin to cope with chilling, even horrifying occurrences beyond their control or understanding, they cannot possibly know what lies ahead, for Hill House is gathering its powers, and soon it will choose one of them to make its own. End quote. I'll be honest, after reading the book, this summary isn't even really accurate. In reality, the story is about Dr. Montague gathering 3 strangers together to investigate a haunted house with him as his assistants/test subjects. They're subjected to various spooks until the whole thing ends prematurely because of an unexpected tragedy. The first paragraph of this book is amazing. Quote, no living organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. Bruh. Basically, Jackson starts off with the wild statement that every living organism has to sleep to maintain sanity. In comparison to this, Hill House never sleeps, which means it's unflinchingly rooted in absolute reality, which means it's insane. Not to mention that this comparison alone suggests that the house falls into the category of a living organism. Only 2 sentences into the book and we're met with some amazing ideas. Granted, they were 2 very long sentences. Miss Jackson loves a semicolon. The story gives you some background as to how and why our 4 main characters are here. Dr. Montague is a paranormal scholar who spent most of his career looking for truly haunted places. He's level-headed, scientific, and rational, but has a strong interest in the supernatural, and as such, he conducts an experiment at Hill House, which is known for being haunted. He looks through newspapers and journals to find people who have been involved with the supernatural before, and so he sends out invitations to join him in the experiment. Only 2 people reply, and that's Theodora and Eleanor, and the last person who joins them is Luke. Luke is the nephew of the woman who owns Hill House, so he's technically not a part of Dr. Montague's experiment, but he still participates because his aunt forces him to supervise everything. Luke is described as a wild child. He has a history of stealing and being a shifty person in general. Throughout the book, he constantly talks about how he's going to inherit the house one day, so he keeps trying to imagine how he'll use it to make money. Theodora is an artsy woman who runs a gift shop. She's unmarried and she's living with a friend. She wears pants, gasp, and she's confident and conversational. She agrees to join Dr. Montague's experiment because she had just gotten into a huge fight with this friend she's been living with. Dr. Montague invited her to Hill House because she, in the past, had undergone psychic experiments in a laboratory. Basically, she has vague, nondescript ESP psychic powers. Eleanor Vance is 32 years old, also unmarried, and has no friends. She spent 11 years taking care of her very belligerent, very sick mother until her mother passed away 3 months ago. After that, Eleanor went to live with her sister and her husband and slept on a spare couch in their house. When Eleanor gets the letter from Dr. Montague to go to Hill House, she's absolutely excited to escape her miserable life. She was picked by the doctor because when she was 12 years old, it rained stones down on their family's house, both outside and inside, and no reporters or investigators could understand how it had happened. The book tells us that young Eleanor and her sister had to move out of their house because of this, and only then did the stones stop raining down. In the present moment, Eleanor is getting ready to head to Hill House, but there is this bleak, frustrating conversation between her sister, and her brother-in-law. Eleanor's asking them to borrow the car, which she helped pay for. The other 2 are treating her like a child and coming up with all sorts of meaningless scenarios as to why she can't have the car. What if their child gets sick? What if Dr. Montague is some secret murderer and he steals the car? What if her sister gets sick? What if Eleanor crashes the car? Notice that they don't care if something happens to Eleanor, just their expensive car. Eleanor gives in, but the next morning she secretly packs her things and steals the car to go out on the road trip. She's very desperate to escape and to have something happen to her for once in her life. On the road, she's marveling at all the new sights of the world, and she's having a great time fantasizing about living a different life. There's a mansion that has stone lions on pedestals near the front step, so she fantasizes about living there as a lady of the manor, sipping wine and having a maid serve her. She stops by the side of the road to admire a line of pink oleander trees. This leads into a long daydream about fairy gardens and Eleanor becoming a magical princess. She makes another stop to eat outside at one of those outdoor cafes near a river. There's a family nearby where a little girl refuses to drink milk unless she has her special cup of stars. The mother explains that the little girl has a cup back at home where the bottom has stars on the inside. So every time she finishes drinking, she can see the stars. Apparently it's been a recent issue in this family where the girl won't drink from any cup unless it's her cup of stars, much to the annoyance of her parents. Eleanor silently watches on and thinks to the girl, "Don't do it. Insist on your cup of stars. Once they have trapped you into being like everyone else, you'll never see your cup of stars again." Back on the road, she slows down to look at a small cottage with a blue door nestled in a garden. Again, she imagines living there. Quote, "People will come to me to have their fortunes told, and I will brew love potions for sad maidens," end quote. Oh, she wants to be Cersei so badly. Her fantasies build on each other, and she incorporates all of these sights from the road trip into her daydreams. It's giving escapism just a little bit, but who among us hasn't done this before? She's singing this one song in her head for most of the book, and the most important line from that song that is repeated multiple times is, Journeys end in lovers meeting. All of her cheer and happiness instantly fades away when she rolls up to the main gate of Hill House. At the gate is a very gruff and very difficult man, Mr. Dudley, who's the groundskeeper and the harbinger character trope. He says a bunch of vague forewarning things and she moves on, rounding the corner and seeing Hill House for the first time. Quote, "The house was vile." She shivered and thought, the words coming freely into her mind. Hill House is vile. It is diseased. Get away from here at once. End quote. And then on the next page, quote, "No human eye can isolate the unhappy coincidence of line and place which suggests evil in the face of a house, and yet somehow a maniac juxtaposition, a badly turned angle, some chance meeting of roof and sky turned Hill House into a place of despair." End quote. Well, it's haunted. Still, Eleanor chooses to hype herself up, remind herself that she's there so she can bring some excitement into her life, and she ironically thinks to herself again, journeys end in lovers meeting. Upon entering the house, Eleanor meets Mrs. Dudley, the caretaker. Even though Dr. Montague invited everyone to the house for the summer to do this experiment, for some reason he's not at the house when she first shows up, so it's just her and Mrs. Dudley together. Even though she showed up in like the middle of the afternoon, but no one else is there, that's my worst nightmare. Mrs. Dudley is creepy. She barely responds to Eleanor's questions and she keeps repeating herself. Quote, "I don't stay after I set out dinner. Not after it begins to get dark. I leave before dark comes. We live over in the town, 6 miles away, so there won't be anyone around if you need help. We couldn't even hear you in the night. No one could. No one lives any nearer than the town. No one else will come any nearer than that. In the night. In the dark." End quote. The whole scene is terrifying. She smiles right before she delivers the last line. "I love you, Mrs. Dudley. Thank you for that thorough visitor orientation." By the way, every single adaptation keeps Mrs. Dudley's original speech. That's how weird and off-putting she is. She's persisted through the decades, still being just as creepy. Hill House is interesting. It got its name because the surrounding area has giant rolling hills, so the house is nestled and hidden by those hills, plus by a nearby forest. It's described as a traditional Gothic mansion with a tower and a lot of decorations, although it points out that none of the architectural details are well made. Everything feels off, like it's been done by amateurs, which at first Eleanor supposes is because the construction team rushed to finish the house once its evil nature became known, but in reality Hill House was built entirely by one man. We'll get more into it later. For now, just know that the house is huge. It's like a labyrinth, 3 stories tall, and all of the bedrooms are on the second floor in one straight line. Each bedroom is also monochromatic, like someone did a color build challenge in The Sims. Eleanor gets put in an all-blue bedroom with blue wallpaper. She starts unpacking and shyly tucks away a few pairs of pants that she had brought, but she isn't brave enough to actually wear them because she's scared of what her mother would have thought of her. Suddenly, Theodora arrives downstairs, and her and Eleanor hit it off instantly. We've all had that moment where we're so uncomfortable in a new place that we cling to the first person we can. The two of them start cracking jokes about how creepy the house is, and Theodora moves into the green room right next to Eleanor's room, and they share a bathroom. She starts unpacking her suitcase, and Eleanor watches as she proudly unpacks her pairs of pants, which helps Eleanor to go ahead and unpack hers as well. This will be a theme throughout the book. Theodora is straightforward and playful and confident, and Eleanor constantly thinks of her as charming, brave, and outgoing. She admires Theodora, but also feels a little bit jealous of her and wants to be her and be around her. It quickly swings from friendship to romantic tension to rivals to back to friendship. Within minutes of being the only ones who have shown up at the house, Eleanor and Theodora are holding hands and running through the house and running across the yard and giggling. Theodora's very hands-on, so she's the type to gently touch Eleanor's shoulder or her cheek or compliment her appearance and insist that they'll be the best of friends while they're there. Just gal pals hanging out. They find a little creek to sit next to. Okay, I'll admit, the banter in this book is so quick and near nonsensical. There's a disconnect between what would conversationally make sense now versus what conversationally made sense back in 1959 when this was written. I used to catch minnows in my hands and let them go. What a farmer's wife you might have made. This is a place for picnics with lunch beside the brook and hard-boiled eggs, chicken salad and chocolate cake, lemonade in a thermos bottle, spilled salt. They're wrong about ants, you know. There were almost never ants. Cows maybe, but I don't think I ever did see an ant on a picnic. Was there always a bull in a field? Did someone always say, but we can't go through that field, that's where the bull is? Did you used to have a comic uncle? Everyone always laughed whatever he said, and he used to tell you not to be afraid of the bull. This keeps on going. I'm sure back in the day, this type of fast-talking change in conversation would have been normal. I don't know, they're so quirky. They're so quirky and cute. They leave the creek area and head back into the house to find that Luke and Dr. Montague have arrived. When Eleanor sees Luke for the first time, she's like, journey's end and lover's meeting? But the moment he opens his mouth, she already dislikes him. She's so real for that. The four of them meet up in the house's parlor. This will be their main meeting place throughout the book, kind of like a little headquarters in the heart of the house. Dr. Montague gives them the, "I've gathered you all here today" type speech, and all of them are nervously joking around about how creepy the house is. Eleanor dissociates a little bit and has to take a moment to remind herself that she's there in Hill House and that she has friends now and that she now belongs to a group, even though it's just a temporary experiment just for the summer. They all have dinner and talk crap about Mrs. Dudley and how much they hate her. Later, we get more descriptions of them being confused about the house's layout because the doors will mysteriously swing closed right behind you, and all of the rooms feel very hard to memorize. After they ask the doctor why he invited them specifically, he briefly mentions Theodora's psychic abilities and Eleanor's strange poltergeist activity from childhood. Upon hearing this, Eleanor insists that she barely remembers that time when stones rained down on her house. In fact, she's strangely disturbed by it. The conversation moves on, but she keeps interjecting about how her mother told her it wasn't a supernatural occurrence, it was the neighbors. And she just keeps being weirdly insistent on it. Nobody cares, so the conversation moves along. But this is the first time we see Eleanor intensely disturbed by what should just be a casual piece of conversation. Throughout the book, we piece together the history of the house, but for the sake of brevity, I'm going to summarize all of it right now. Hill House was built by Hugh Crane for his family. His wife never got to see the finished house because as she was being driven to the house, they got all the way to a curve in the driveway when suddenly her carriage crashed into a large tree. She died from that somehow, no idea how fast carriages used to go, but okay. Thus, Hugh Crane was left to live in the house with his two young daughters. Crane built the house with uneven measurements to ensure that every angle was slightly off, which is why all the doors shut constantly. Inside of one of the rooms is a random huge marble statue of Crane and his family. He was also into arts and crafts. Later in the story, the four characters find a strange handmade book that he would read to his children at night, full of horrifying illustrations of demons and the seven sins and hell and damnation, and his blood is smeared on the last page, as well as like some weird oath to his daughters. Just some light bedtime reading. Eventually Crane died and his two daughters fought over who got to keep Hill House. The oldest one went on to live in the house for the rest of her life, being attended by a servant girl that she'd hired from the local village. The Crane daughter who lived in the house passed away in the house, and the younger sister accused the servant girl of letting her die through negligence. By happenstance, the servant girl inherits the house, which pisses off the younger Crane daughter even more. So the servant, now the lady of the manor, is harassed by Crane's daughter and her own village people until she basically goes insane. So she ends her own life from the top of Hill House's tower. Since then, Hill House has been claimed to be haunted and has been passed to different renters because nobody will stay there for very long. It's a convoluted backstory. After telling the group all about Hill House's history, Dr. Montague offers them the chance to quit the experiment and leave if they're too scared to continue. He says that if he sees any of them succumbing to the influences of the evil house, he'll force them to leave for their own safety. So the book is chronological. It goes through each day in the house and what Eleanor and the others get up to, so I'll start summarizing the general progression of events. In these first conversations between the subjects and Dr. Montague, Eleanor is determined to not let herself be singled out for being a scaredy cat. Theodora and Luke are mostly jokesters who use humor to cover up their anxiety, but Eleanor seems to make everybody else nervous. Dr. Montague also takes extra care with her because I think he senses the instability in her mental state, which makes Eleanor double down on trying to become brave and unbothered by everything. She says ominous stuff sometimes while everyone is talking. Things like, "We couldn't leave this house now if we wanted to anyway." At some point they have a conversation about locking the front door at night and Eleanor is like, "What if we need to break out?" Pretty much every time she says something in this book, everyone stops and stares at her. Her inner monologue as she enters the house is constantly negative. She's berating herself for being a baby, for being nervous. She tells herself that she's ridiculous and silly and foolish, and that everyone's probably laughing at her behind her back. To be fair, everyone around her is surprised by what she says, yes, but in the end they always verbally reassure her that it's gonna be fine. So her fears are unfounded at best, and straight up paranoid at worst. Over the course of the story, she has mood swings and experiences intense fear, happiness, and anger from day to day. Whether it's her or the house altering her mood, it's unclear. Despite moments of fear and foreboding, there are moments where Eleanor is genuinely more happy in the house than she'd ever been in her entire life. Theodora comes up with a nickname for her and calls her Nell or Nellie throughout the book. I'm gonna use Nell because it's much easier to say than Eleanor every single time. Her and Theodora are really close really quickly. They sit by the fireplace together every night. Nell gets to complain to Theo about her mother. To try and impress Theo, Nell lies and says she lives in her own apartment with stone lions on the mantle and a cup of stars and a blue door and curtains and all sorts of stuff. And Theo is so into her. Like, at one point she says something like, "You're sweet and pleasant and everyone likes you very much. Luke has fallen madly in love with you and I am jealous." She says this on like night 1, I'm pretty sure, which is wild. There's a scene where Theo paints Eleanor's nails red and jokes around with her and is like, "I don't like being with women who aren't painted." Like, she's just so flirtatious. Luke is courteous and playful towards kind of everybody. Dr. Montague is like a father figure. He's super patient and kind to all of them and easily amused by their questions. Often they'll all go out to explore the nearby woods, finding strawberries and talking about having picnics. It's very cottagecore. Still though, Nell is so wrapped up in wanting to have friends and a relationship that she overinterprets everything they say to her and she freaks out over little things and she tears herself down constantly. She thinks about her mother a lot and what her mother would think of her saying or doing certain things, which is to be expected. She spent 11 years taking care of her mom, and besides that, parental figures have a lot of influence over us in general. With her mother having been so strict, of course Nell is going to have a hard time separating her own thoughts and desires from her mother's own rules. Intermingled with all of this other stuff, because this is a horror novel and they're in Hill House, of course there's a ton of creepy moments. While they're all exploring the house one day, they come to a door that leads to a library with a huge spiral staircase going all the way up to the top of Hill House's tower. For whatever reason, Nell is extremely scared of the room and won't even enter it. And the only thing she can say is, "Mother!" I mean, her mom's been dead for 3 months. We don't know what she's talking about. Dr. Montague, Luke, and Theo go inside of the library with no problem, and Dr. Montague explains to them in great detail how the former servant girl turned lady of the house from decades ago used the staircase to end her own life, which, thank you, Dr. Montague. On a different day, they're exploring the house again, and Nell is on the veranda looking up at the tower when Luke calls out to her. Turns out she's been leaning so far back on the veranda that she's almost horizontal, about to fall off the railing. The entire time they're all running around trying to document the house's rooms. Mrs. Dudley occasionally pops in to make them breakfast or lunch or dinner, and then she just disappears. She is simply not putting up with them. Throughout the book, both Dr. Montague and Theo suddenly tell Nell that she should leave Hill House and never come back. But neither of them actually make her leave. They just rescind their statements as soon as they make it. It's like, people, if you sense that she's not emotionally stable enough for this, make her leave. Especially Theo, who is literally psychic. Every time they mention her being too sensitive for the experiment, of course Nell doubles down and she's like, I don't want to leave. Then things begin to ramp up in intensity. In the middle of the night, Nell wakes up after thinking that she hears her mother calling her and banging on the walls. Because apparently that's how her mother would summon her back when she was still alive. She would bang on the wall with her cane, and Nell would have to come in and give her medicine. But then Nell hears Theo calling her from the other room, so she runs to Theo's bed. That's when they realize that something is rushing down the hallway and violently knocking on all of the walls and the doors. The two of them are like, well, Luke and Dr. Montague are going to handle this paranormal situation, but then they hear the men somewhere outside shouting for some reason. Inside of the house, the knocking gets so loud and intense that Nell and Theo watch as Theo's bedroom door bulges inwards, and so Nell shouts at the thing to go away, which makes the thing instantly go quiet, and then Nell is like, oh shoot, it knows that we're in here now. There's nothing but silence, followed by the doorknob turning, and then sounds of some kind of animal, and then giggling. Insane. Whatever the thing is, it goes away right as Dr. Montague and Luke show up to Theo's door because they heard them yelling. Did anything happen in here while we were outside? Nothing in particular. Someone knocked on the door with a cannonball and then tried to get in and eat us and started laughing its head off when we wouldn't open the door. But nothing really out of the way. Dr. Montague and Luke explained that they were chasing a black dog that they had heard inside the house. Whatever the thing was, it ran outside and they chased it, which is exactly when they heard Theo and Nell yelling. Dr. Montague solemnly notes that this must mean Hill House is trying to separate them. Still, the next morning everyone is super cheerful and lighthearted about the whole thing. It's almost supernatural the way they're all enjoying themselves suddenly. In the mirror, Nell is thinking about Hill House and she tells herself, journeys end in lovers' meeting. I can't believe I'm actually happy here in Hill House. Dr. Montague himself notices how they're all super excited and he's like, we need to be cautious. This could be the house altering our state of mind. Nell makes this offhand joke about how she can't even be certain that any of the rest of them are real. She says she could just be making them all up in her head. And then he's like, if you really believe that, Eleanor, I'm gonna have to send you away immediately because that's a dangerous mental state to be in. Suddenly Nell gets very defensive and bitter about being singled out and she's like, well, if I had to take Hill House's side over the rest of you, of course you'd want to send me away. That's not normal. They all meet up in the parlor as usual, but then Luke spots writing on a nearby wall. It's chalk, and it spells out the words, help Eleanor come home. This moment was officially when the book was creepy enough to make me put it down for the night. Everyone's confused, Nell is freaking out, insisting that she had nothing to do with the writing on the wall. She starts spiraling about how she's being picked on, how she's been chosen, how she doesn't want any undue attention on her. Theo then teases her and tells her that maybe she wrote the words herself, and Nell completely flips out and starts straight up yelling. She says that she's not self-centered like Theodora is, but then Dr. Montague butts in and says, Eleanor, be reasonable. Theodora is just poking at you to make you angry so you won't be scared anymore. Then Nell immediately feels embarrassed and apologizes, but her inner monologue is a little sinister. I must say something, Eleanor told herself. I must show them that I'm a good sport after all. A good sport. Let them think that I am ashamed of myself. I'm sorry, she said. I was frightened. Of course you were, the doctor said. And Eleanor thought, how simple he is. How transparent. He believes every silly thing he's ever heard. He thinks even that Theodora shocked me out of my hysteria. She smiled at him and thought, now I am back in the fold. Basically, her paranoia and distrust are getting worse, and she's even pretending not to be angry with all of them. For the rest of the day, she keeps commiserating in her head about how, if Eleanor is going to be an outsider, she's going to be it all alone. The next few days are a similar mixture of the four of them acting like they're in a happy daze, with Nell still having some underlying resentment against everyone, especially Theo, for accusing her of writing on the wall. One day, Dr. Montague mentions that his wife is going to be visiting them at the house. Theo finds that someone has doused her entire room in either red paint or blood, including all of her clothes from her wardrobe. What's worse, there's the same writing on the far wall written in blood or paint, this time that says, help Eleanor come home, Eleanor. As Theo's hunched over her clothes and sobbing, Nell is literally smiling to herself, like, what? Dr. Montague and Luke see the mess, and so Nell hints that Theodora did have red nail polish in her suitcase, and then she giggles. So Dr. Montague is side-eyeing her like, okay, what? These events force Theodora to sleep in Nell's room for the rest of the book. Plus, Theo has to borrow her clothes, and she's being super cutesy about it, thanking Nell for being so generous. But Nell doesn't give a crap. She's so spiteful. Later that night in the parlor, just listen to this passage. I would like to hit her with a stick, Eleanor thought, looking down on Theodora's head beside her chair. I would like to batter her with rocks. I hate her, Eleanor thought. She sickens me. She's all washed and clean and wearing my red sweater. Nell? Theodora looked up at her and smiled. I really am sorry, you know, she said. I would like to watch her dying, Eleanor thought, and smiled back and said, don't be silly. Another passage on the next page. I think we are only afraid of ourselves, the doctor said slowly. No, Luke said, of seeing ourselves clearly and without disguise. Of knowing what we really want, Theodora said. She pressed her cheek against Eleanor's hand, and Eleanor, hating the touch of her, took her hand away quickly. She's ruthless! Eleanor's decline only continues from here. In conversation, she talks about how she feels she's dissolving. She feels like a small creature swallowed whole by a monster, and she mentions wanting to surrender to it. Dr. Montague and everyone else stares at her like, maybe you should leave, Eleanor. But no one actually makes her leave. It's infuriating. One night she hears childlike gurgling and gasping coming from the walls. She grabs Theo's hand out of fear, and then she screams at whatever's making the sounds. But then she wakes herself up, and Theo isn't holding her hand, so she's like, whose hand was I holding? And then her and Luke have a small moment together while sitting on some steps outside. I understand why, as a 32-year-old woman with no friends and no social life, she's trying to speedrun friendships and relationships, but it is a little embarrassing how quickly Eleanor is trying to turn Luke into a suitor. This is the first real autonomous moment of her life, and she's trying to be like everybody else. I get it. But she's not even really listening to Luke. To be fair, he's not that interesting. He just keeps talking about how he didn't have a mother growing up and he's so sad all the time. Nell is like, it's probably the way he tries to pick up women. Tell them you didn't have a mother so that they'll want to baby you like a child. And honestly, she's so real for that. Their whole conversation gave me the ick. I don't know what it is. And I thought Nell genuinely didn't like him, so I don't know why he's the love interest. No joke, this is the only full conversation they have together in the entire story. After knowing that her and Luke spent time together, Theo starts teasing Nell about him. This pisses Nell off, so one night she storms out of the house in anger, and Theo follows her into the dark. They silently walk through the woods together, both pissed off now. This passage, it's also hard to interpret. They're both mad at each other, with Theo trying to warn Nell not to get involved with Luke because he's no good, and Nell is being defensive of herself and her rights as an adult woman to do whatever the hell she wants. But neither of them are angry anymore suddenly, and the book says something about love and how they almost wept for each other, and then they hold hands again. So, what is happening? All of this evaporates anyway because Theo looks behind them, sees some unknown thing, she never describes what it was. The two of them sprint through the woods to outrun this thing chasing them, and Eleanor has a full-on hallucination of a bright sunny day where a family is having a picnic on a hill. I think this is when she officially snaps. And, holding Theodora, Eleanor looked up at Luke and the doctor and felt the room rock madly, and time, as she had always known time, stop. The next day, she's wandering outside on the grounds, giggling to herself and picking flowers. She's gone. She's gone, y'all. Dr. Montague's wife shows up. He is not excited to see his wife, and their interactions are super stiff. They even sleep in separate rooms. I'm surprised to find that even though this was written in the 50s, there are a ton of common ghost hunting techniques that Mrs. Montague uses because she's like a ghost hunter and her husband hates that because he's like a scholar. She's so Ryan and Shane coded. She's so Garrett Watts coded. She talks about planchette, automatic writing, the Ouija board. At some point in the book, even the Winchester Mystery House is mentioned somewhere. Shirley Jackson was clearly no stranger to ghost hunting and paranormal investigation, it seems. Mrs. Montague is not the best ghost hunter. She tries to tell them that the spirits told her about nuns being walled up inside the house, and Dr. Montague is like, you are so incorrect. Although everyone is skeptical about Mrs. Montague's ghost hunting methods, she ends up telling them that some spirit inside the house goes by Nell or Nellie, and when she asked it what it wanted, it said, want to be home, waiting, mother, lost. Everyone in the room is ridiculously chill about this, by the way. Meanwhile, Eleanor asks them why she's being picked on out of all of them, and nobody can give her any answers. That night, the four main characters decide to spend the night in one room because they have a feeling that something bad will happen now that Mrs. Montague has gone around stirring up spirits. Their intuition turns out to be correct because as they're all waiting in the doctor's room, drinking brandy, the knocking comes back. In fact, the entire house begins rocking and shaking like it's an earthquake. Nell has this extremely disjointed, surreal experience where she hears laughter and thinks that something is coming for her specifically. She hears loud noises in her own head, and she says she's disappearing inch by inch into this house. So she closes her eyes and says the words, I'll come, as if she's agreeing to something. But when she says this and opens her eyes, the entire night has somehow passed, and it's daytime again. She just lost hours and hours of consciousness somehow without moving, and everyone around her isn't really reacting as if it's abnormal. What's worse is that they all go down to eat breakfast, and Mrs. Montague heard and felt nothing that night. It was just them. On another day, Nell and Theo are sitting with each other, and Eleanor suddenly tells Theo that she wants to live with her back in the city. Alright, quite the turnaround compared to how angry she was with her a few days ago. Theo tries to gently and playfully say no, but Nell insists. Interestingly, she uses a couple of sentences that Luke had said to her earlier when they had their moment together. Theo says, "I'm not in the habit of taking home stray cats." Like, dang! Okay. Quote, Theodora threw down her pencil in exasperation. "Do you always go where you're not wanted?" Eleanor smiled placidly. "I've never been wanted anywhere," she said. End quote. Someone help this woman! This is her cry for help! Later, Luke sees that Nell is sulking, and Theo explains the whole situation. He responds by saying, "Poor Nell, journeys end in lovers' meeting." So now he's teasing her. The three of them go out and walk the grounds, and Nell now is fully clinging to Theo. Suddenly, in the middle of the conversation, she tells them that she's scared that she killed her mother. Quote, "She knocked on the wall and called me and I never woke up. I ought to have brought her the medicine. I always did before. But this time she called me and I never woke up. I've wondered since if I did wake up, if I did wake and hear her, and if I just went back to sleep, it would have been easy, and I've wondered about it." End quote. Theo tells her not to worry too much about it, and Luke also brushes it off. No one is really listening to Nell, and it's so frustrating. Either way, suddenly Nell is happy again because she's convinced that now that she's confessed to Theo, they'll be able to live together. She's fantasizing about them getting an apartment and running the trinket shop together. She's also still paranoid, so she keeps looking behind her to make sure that Luke and Theo aren't talking about her behind her back, and how they're probably fighting over her because they love her so much, and they insist that they aren't. So she keeps walking through the woods ahead of them, thinking about how lucky she is to have found Theo and how she'll never let her go. And now she's thinking to herself again, journeys end in lovers' meeting. So I suppose now she's convinced herself that she's in love with Theo. Pretty soon she realizes that she's suddenly alone, and she feels some invisible force pass by her or pass through her. When she runs back to find Luke and Theo, the two of them are chilling by some trees, and the way they treat her when she runs up to them is so strange. These are grown adults, but they're being really petty, and it's very clear that the two of them purposely let Nell wander off on her own because she was slightly annoying them. But a part of me also thinks maybe I can't trust Nell's rendition of this scene, because we know she isn't the most reliable narrator right now. I wouldn't put it past her or Hill House for her to be dreaming up delusions about how everyone around her is laughing at her behind her back. Maybe this scene really happened, or maybe it was her twisting things with her imagination, or maybe it didn't happen at all. I don't know. It just seems so out of character for the both of them to do that to her. For the next couple of days, Eleanor slowly drifts away from everybody. While she's in the same room with them, she's hearing somebody singing to her, and she's just living inside of her own head. The climax of the book happens when Nell wakes up in the middle of the night to sneak out of her room. For some reason, she's drawn to the library, the one room in the entire house that she couldn't stand to enter before. She hears her mother calling to her, which leads her on a long chase throughout the house. She drifts through rooms, hearing voices calling her name, and she's laughing and dancing and running everywhere in her nightgown. Theo realizes that Nell's gone, and so she sets off a search where everybody in the house tries to find her. The entire time, Nell is hiding from them and running away from them, in the dark, laughing at how stupid they all are. She's going feral. Before she knows it, she's made it to the library, and she sprints up the staircase before someone spots her and yells up at her. It kind of snaps her out of it momentarily, and then she realizes that the staircase is halfway detached from the wall, and she's in imminent danger if she stays up there. Luke slowly climbs up and helps her down, and the entire time everybody is looking up at the two of them, worried and slightly annoyed. Luke's dialogue here is giving older brother. "Nell," Theodora said, "don't be frightened. It will all be alright, really." "Of course it will be alright," Luke said grimly. "Probably it will only be my neck that gets broken. Hold on, Nell. I'm coming onto the platform. I want to get past you so you can go down ahead of me." He seemed hardly out of breath in spite of climbing, but his hand trembled as he reached out to take hold of the railing, and his face was wet. "Come on," he said sharply. Eleanor hung back. "The last time you told me to go ahead, you never followed," she said. "Perhaps I'll just push you over the edge," Luke said. "Let you smash down there on the floor. Now behave yourself and move slowly. Get past me and start down the stairs. And just hope," he added furiously, "that I can resist the temptation to give you a shove." Like, the audacity! She's saved from the staircase. Everyone's worried about her, but it's a little bit too late. This woman needed help way earlier, and someone should have been looking out for her properly, not just ignoring her and letting her get to this point. Needless to say, Eleanor is packing up her things the next morning because she's being sent away from the experiment. Mrs. Montague tells all of them that Theodora's room has nothing wrong with it. She sees no blood or red paint. I guess it was just a shared hallucination. And Theodora is back to wearing her normal clothes again. Everyone's taking turns saying goodbye to Nell and being super nice to her. And the entire time, she's in full denial. She tells them she simply can't leave Hill House. She even reveals that she's stolen her sister's car and that she lives at her sister's house, so she has nowhere else to go and everything she owns is inside of the car. She keeps telling them that Hill House wants her to be there, that it's her new home. For some reason, Dr. Montague won't let anybody drive her back. He's forcing Nell to drive home all by herself, knowing the mental state that she's in. He has to just about wrestle her into her car and make her get behind the wheel. It's also revealed that they've been in Hill House for only a little over a week. 1 week! All of this happened in like a week? Ain't no way. They all say their goodbyes, Eleanor keeps protesting, they make her start driving, and so she goes off. Quote, "Journeys end in lovers' meeting. But I won't go," she thought, and laughed aloud to herself. Hill House is not as easy as they are. Just by telling me to go away, they can't make me leave. Not if Hill House means me to stay. "Go away, Eleanor," she chanted aloud. "Go away, Eleanor, we don't want you anymore. Not in our Hill House. Go away, Eleanor, you can't stay here." "But I can," she's saying. "But I can. They don't make the rules around here. They can't turn me out or shut me out or laugh at me or hide from me. I won't go, and Hill House belongs to me." End quote. Then, before she understands what she's doing, she floors it and heads straight towards a large tree in the bend of the driveway. Yes, this is the same tree that Crane's wife's carriage crashed into all those years ago. And the scariest thing is that right before she hits, she says, "Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why don't they stop me?" To have that last moment of sanity and clarity right before hitting, that's horrifying. The book ends abruptly, but it's implied that Eleanor died. We get a few sentences about how Theodora made up with her partner back at home, Luke went off to live in Paris, and Dr. Montague retired from the field. Then it ends in almost the same way the book began. Quote, "Hill House itself, not sane, stood against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, its walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone." End quote. What an awesome story! It leaves us with some questions, though. Was Eleanor always haunted by something? If stones rained down on her house, was a poltergeist following her around? Was she just doomed by the narrative? Could anything have stopped her from succumbing to the intense negative energy of Hill House? She was a well-rounded character, shy and imaginative, but filled with anger and resentment and insecurities, and an intense hunger for human connection. Also, who wrote "Eleanor come home" on the wall? I have no idea. Maybe it was the house. Maybe it was Eleanor. But then again, that wouldn't explain how Mrs. Montague was able to get the same phrase when she was talking to a ghost. I also thought Eleanor might have been the one to throw nail polish all over Theodora's room, but Mrs. Montague says she entered the room and there was no paint to be seen anywhere, so that was an illusion, so Nell couldn't have done it. Is Nell haunted by her mother, maybe, who's now manifested around her as a poltergeist? Because back when stones fell down on her house when she was 12, it was mentioned that it was only a few months after her father had died. So maybe Eleanor has the power to be a magnet for her own parents' deceased souls? Or was she herself a poltergeist? Even the Wikipedia suggests that she might be telekinetic somehow, which I'm like, huh? She was a good character, an emotionally unstable woman who deteriorated quickly, even though 3 other people were with her constantly, enough that they should have noticed. In fact, they did notice. They did nothing about it, though. All in all, it's a surprisingly timeless, heartbreaking story that still holds up to this day. So let's see how the movies do. The Haunting, released in 1963, is a 1-to-1 retelling of the book. I appreciate that. In the 60s, when they meant adaptation, they meant adaptation. Seriously, this movie doesn't change much of anything. The plot is mostly the same, so I won't bore you with recounting the same story. Some things are omitted for the sake of runtime, some things are switched around, but even a lot of the dialogue is really faithful to the source material. Most of it might be because Shirley Jackson was still alive to help them with making the movie. It's entirely in black and white, complete with a full title sequence, a musical score, over-the-top theatrical acting, and the sharpest bras you've ever seen. Plus, the movie uses voiceovers to convey what Eleanor is thinking, which is not used, like, at all anymore today. We should bring that back. Everyone's smoking. Everyone's drinking. Not a glass of water in sight. I'll say one of the stranger changes that they make is Eleanor Vance is now Eleanor Lance, and Dr. Montague is now Dr. Markway. I don't understand why. Eleanor is very emotive. When I read the book, I imagined her to be intense, but soft-spoken. But no, in this movie, she starts out yelling.
Now, just a minute, young lady. You happen to be in my living room. I happen to be in my bedroom, and I'd pay a good part of your rent for it. Now, get out before I show you what my nerves can really do.
She's also generally more depressed and cynical than she was in the book.
I want to know more about you.
I dislike lobster. Sleep on my left side.
Why on the left side?
I read someplace it wears the heart out quicker.
The scene where Theo is painting Eleanor's nails has the added layer of Eleanor being drunk, which I never even thought about. But yeah, in the book, they were constantly drinking. Come to think of it, even earlier in this movie, she says she doesn't drink, but then this scene she's drunk. So I don't think it's a bad change of character. I think it was just unexpected for me. The set of the house itself is ghoulish and ghastly. It's well done, lots of decorations and lots of clutter. Because the movie is black and white, they took great care to differentiate the rooms by using a ton of textures. It took a little liberty with the statues, and it filled the entire house with the statues, while I think in the book there was just one giant statue in one room. And the other adaptations from now on also fill the entire house with life-size statues. There are wonderful uses of mirrors in some of the shots. Theodora's actress was on point. That woman is a lesbian. There was so much tension between her and Eleanor. The amount of times she just blatantly flirts with her is insane. 1963.
We're going to be great friends, Theo.
Like sisters?
To just us, good companions.
Excellent. To my new companion. If you feel in the least bit nervous, just run right into my room now.
Thanks. Good night.
Theo, I think you'd better move in with Eleanor.
You're the doctor.
Oh, but that's my room, my very own room. Oh,
Don't get all hung up, Nell. We'll have fun. Like sisters.
I've been waiting all my life for something like this to happen.
In the book, Dr. Montague felt like a warm, fatherly figure who was really excited about his experiments, so he liked to talk about his scholarly experiences. But Dr. Markway in the movie feels like he's just mansplaining all the time. I don't like him. His long speeches just don't translate well when you turn them into dialogue. The movie doesn't quite know what to do with Luke, since he's not a romantic interest for either of the women, so they just turn him into a paranormal skeptic that Dr. Markway honestly spends more time converting him to the idea of ghosts being real than he even spends like observing his actual test subjects for the experiment. Speaking of romantic interest, Dr. Markway is the one that Nell ends up being interested in, and although the man is married and has known Nell for approximately 2 days, he's clearly reciprocating. Theo spends the movie teasing Nell about this and warning her about how she needs to back off the doctor, which gives Nell a great opportunity to randomly become homophobic.
Oh, you poor, stupid innocent.
I'd rather be innocent than like you.
Meaning what?
Now who's being stupid and innocent? Nature's mistakes, they're called. You, for instance.
What is this? Either way, she gets her comeuppance when the doctor's wife shows up unexpectedly, and Thea was like, I told you to be careful around him, because she's psychic, so of course she knows he's married. The practical effects of the haunting are fine. They're pretty good. I genuinely got chills in the scene where Eleanor hears whispers and laughing from inside the wall. I think they really nailed the description that the book gave. I thought they wouldn't figure out the knocking scene when the door bulges inwards, but they did that really freaking well. Towards the end of the movie, Nell is running through the house, going insane, as you do, and they straight up have things like breaking and exploding around her. She runs up the staircase, and by the way, this is a great interpretation of the library staircase, as described in the book. While she's on the staircase, Dr. Markway is the one to get her down, not Luke, like in the book. But then Dr. Markway's wife, who had been missing that night for no reason, opens some trap door in the ceiling, and Nell, gets so scared that she faints. Nothing really comes out of it, though, because, she's still saved from the staircase. But I thought, she would get startled into falling, and I thought they were gonna, try and go for an alternate ending, but no, she's fine. She still packs up the next day because Dr. Markway sends her away. And he doesn't even care about his wife being gone. Like, she goes missing 5 minutes before the end of the movie, jumps out of a trapdoor in the ceiling, but no one sees her. And then she's still missing, even when they're sending Nell off to go home. Dr. Markway simply does not care that his wife has gone missing inside of a haunted house. Nell keeps insisting that Mrs. Markway took her place and that she belongs there, trapped inside the house. Dr. Markway is like, sure, dear. You're so cute when you're hysterical. The ending of the movie is almost the same as the book, with Nell driving away, except this time the movie says that the house is taking over her steering wheel, and the house is driving her towards the tree, and Nell is just like freaking out, but then she accepts it. Then there's a genuinely scary moment when a random woman in white sprints past the tree for 1 split second. Everyone runs over to the car crash, and we see Eleanor dead, and Dr. Markway's wife comes out and conveniently explains that she doesn't know where she is, and the house is evil. I just don't think we needed her as a character. I don't think we needed, like, the added element of her. Then the movie, of course, has the characters blatantly explain subtext to you.
Where the first Mrs. Crane was also killed in an accident. There was something in the car with her, I'm sure of it. Call it what you like, but Hill House is haunted. He didn't want her to leave, and her poor, bedeviled mind wasn't strong enough to fight it.
It was what she wanted, to stay here. She had no place else to go.
And then it ends. Overall, I didn't have any qualms with this. I respected all the choices made. I think it could have been a little spookier, but 1963, like, let's be so real. People were fainting at the idea of women wearing shorts or something. I listened to a podcast called Random Number Generator Horror Podcast Number 9. It's made by the same people who made Night Vale and Within the Wires. I'm obsessed with all their work. Basically, the podcast is about 2 dudes just watching horror movies and reviewing them. When I was making this video, they even released an episode about this movie, and I, like, freaked out. I really enjoyed listening to it. Highly recommend that podcast if you like horror movies. I have listened to every single episode. I'm obsessed with it. Okay, let's move on to The Haunting 1999. The Haunting 1999 is widely mocked by critics. In my copy of The Haunting of Hill House book, there is a foreword by Laura Miller. They say, do yourself a favor and skip the 1999 version. I was intrigued. I had no idea that this specific movie was also a huge inspiration for Scary Movie 2. Seriously? The ghost in Scary Movie 2 is called Hugh Kane, and it all takes place in a giant haunted house where students are recruited by a creepy professor doing an experiment. There's even a character named Theo in Scary Movie 2, and like that scene where that girl like gets freaky with the ghost. It doesn't happen in this movie, but like I can't even explain it. Let's talk about it. 1999's The Haunting also stars Liam Neeson and Owen Wilson. What? I can't escape him. The synopsis. 3 insomniacs agree to participate in a study which involves sleeping in a secluded mansion. But the study takes a nightmarish turn when Dr. Marrow explains the horrific history of the mansion, and the estate seems to take a life of its own. Why do they keep changing this man's name? So, this movie is nothing like the book. It's easier and quicker for me to tell you what they did keep from the original book than to tell you what they changed. Hill House is huge and grand and creepy. Sure. All of the characters are mostly the same. Sure. Eleanor's name is back to Eleanor Vance, and she has the same backstory of taking care of her mother who recently passed away. Theodora is flirtatious. Mrs. Dudley is there also, and she gives her, like, in the night, in the dock speech. The person who built Hill House is still Hugh Crane, and the house has a spiral staircase. Those are the only similarities that this movie has with the book. Let me describe how stupid this movie is. Eleanor gets invited to Liam Neeson's experiment taking place in a museum-looking-ass Hill House. By the way, Liam Neeson has an assistant who is psychic. She does not matter. She joins their experiment and has to immediately leave within the first 5 minutes, and she never comes back. Alright, back to Hill House. They took away all attempts to make this house even look like a family was supposed to live in it. I don't know who the art director was for this movie, or if they even had one, but none of this visually makes sense. This is some Spy Kids, Shark Boy and Lava Girl looking shit. Eleanor arrives to the house, and then Theodora arrives. Theodora is a walking sex object. They don't even try to give her any depth. She will hit on anything that moves, even though she's already in 2 committed relationships with a boyfriend and a girlfriend. We never learn about her backstory. We just know that she artist and she sex. She sexes and that's it. Luke shows up. He's a typical 90s boy, and he's like a comic relief character. And he's Owen Wilson. Dr. Markway is instantly weirdly drawn to Nell, so I think that they kind of like attempted to retain the first movie's tension between them. This is so unfair. Imagine taking care of your sick mother for 11 years straight and building no social skills, and then the moment she dies, you get invited to a sick-ass haunted house, you get paid $900 a week for it, and then within 1 hour of arriving on site, the hottest person and the smartest person on the premises are in love with you. What kind of Riz percentile? These scenes where they're exploring the house. Why? Why is it like a fun house? Is this a carnival? What vision are they going for here? One man built this in 1800. Why are things moving? Why I don't understand. Yeah, and they're all at Hill House for the sleep experiment because they all have chronic insomnia, which has no bearing on the actual plot of the movie. Eleanor's actress unsettles me. She creeps me out. Okay, I'm sorry, it's her face. It's her eyes. I can't get over how this looks like a Baldur's Gate 3 level. Like, yo, this is Raphael's house. The set detail is beautiful. Sure, if I lived there, I would spend all of my time studying every little tiny carving. So yes, the bedrooms are super cool. Besties, I can't tell you the plot of the movie. Creepy stuff happens, but like only in the weirdest way. Carvings are coming to life. There's like Casper levels of ghost CGI. Dr. Merrill has them fill out paperwork for the experiment, and she's just doing a kindergarten maze puzzle. The fireplace, y'all. Who has a human-sized fireplace and doesn't get investigated by the authorities? The fireplace has a gigantic flue carved into a lion's head that can just move around. Why? I feel like I'm watching something take place on another planet right now. The movie does have like the writing moment happen where it says, "Welcome home, Eleanor." Ghost children are whispering to her. The whole thing turns into like a weird mystery where she has to find their bodies, which of course are in the human-sized fireplace. What a shocker. Hugh Crane built Hill House because he was rich, because he ran a textile mill. Eleanor discovers that he was burying his children workers in his fireplace. At first I thought it was to cover up premature child worker deaths so he could keep his textile mill running. You know, because maybe back then they were like, I don't know, starting to question the ethics of underage workers. But it's explained that no, Crane just kept children in his house because he couldn't have children of his own. So he would invite them over but just not let them leave. So they just died of like not being able to leave the house. What? I struggled to figure out if this was a comedy, but I don't think it is. Genuinely. Dr. Merrill reveals that the experiment is actually about fear and not insomnia, but like, it doesn't matter because Eleanor is getting her hair braided by naked ghost babies telling her to investigate their deaths. She even tells everybody else about the skeletons in the fireplace, and like that is a concrete piece of evidence that they could check and corroborate and verify. But nobody even believes her. So I just realized that this is Scooby-Doo. This is Scooby-Doo. It's just so stupid. I think the special effects artists kidnapped the movie's director and producer and actually held them in a basement until they agreed to fill every second of this movie with some kind of unnecessary over-the-top CGI. Also, at some point, Eleanor learns that Hugh Crane wants to get her ghost pregnant. So explain that. There's one scene where they manage to shoehorn in the spiral staircase, but it's not even in the right location and it's just thrown in there. And Eleanor is she just sits there and like watches stuff happen around her, and the way she screams makes me laugh. I can't take her seriously. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, by the way, Owen Wilson gets decapitated by the stone lion flue in the fireplace. I just thought you should know that. And then statues start coming to life like it's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. At the end, there's a full-bodied apparition of Hugh Crane that descends. Eleanor sacrifices herself for the sake of the dead children. I don't know. What in the Five Nights at Freddy's? Girl, just pray, leave some offerings, cleanse the house with some incense, just get out of there. Sacrificing yourself for some dead children. I feel like this movie was an experiment on how long I could sustain a healthy mental state while watching it. I feel like I need to be financially compensated for watching this movie. You know what? Like the video, refresh the page, turn the ad blockers off, and let a couple of ads run, please. Please. I'm declaring beef with the entire year 1999 right here and right now for doing this to Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. 3 out of 10. Maybe even 2 out of 10. Okay, 3 out of 10. The effects were cool. I just wish they existed in any other piece of media. We've come to the final adaptation so far, Netflix's 2018 The Haunting of Hill House series. 10 episodes, each an hour long. Let me take a second to say something here. I have an issue with adaptations. No, I don't think all art has to be drafted up entirely without any outside inspiration. In fact, that would be nearly impossible. But I also don't believe that every story has already been told. I think it's quite the opposite, which is why I don't like adaptations. Yes, they're fun and they can be quite unique and interesting. They can help modernize older stories and bring more awareness to original works and make them more accessible and engaging to new audiences. They can also be used as blatant cash grabs. They can be used to stifle writers who have genuinely good ideas for the sake of executives who instead want to make something that's more predictably profitable. Lately, I feel like I'm rarely interested in movies that come out nowadays because there are so many adaptations and sequels. I'm glad that in 2018 I went into The Haunting of Hill House not realizing that it was an adaptation, because now that I know it is, I admit it does lose a bit of that luster for me. Don't get me wrong, it's amazing. I meant it when I said it's the best horror media I've experienced in a long time. Comparing it to the original book though, I really do think it didn't have to be tied to Hill House at all. Truly, the amount of things changed makes me wish that it had been released as its own thing. I wish they completely tossed out the tagline of it being a modern retelling, because it's not really. It's just inspired by it. It's a beautiful piece of art that could have stood on its own for sure, and that frustrates me. Okay, I'm gonna summarize the episodes and overall plot of the show. I still recommend that you go watch the entirety of it if you haven't already, because I'm going to leave out a lot of little things, and with this series, you'll want to sit and experience the little things. They all tie into each other really well. It's a super clever, super emotionally intense experience, so if you've never seen the show, or it's just been a while since you've seen it, now would be the time to go watch it. The episodes of the TV show jump around a lot between flashbacks and present day, so I find it easier to explain it to you chronologically and just give you context up front, and then we'll go through the episodes for the main plot of the show in general. The series follows a family, the Cranes, who spend one summer living in Hill House, an old Gothic mansion built in the 1800s by the Hill family. Each episode includes flashbacks of events that happened to the family during their stay, and shows how their current day lives and relationships have been affected as a result. Hugh and Olivia Crane are house flippers. They move into Hill House to renovate it in the hopes of reselling it. Along with them, they bring their 5 whole children, Stephen, the oldest, Shirley, Theodora, and twins Eleanor and Luke. Soon after getting to the house, each member of the family experiences their own strange hauntings. Hugh is mostly practical and optimistic. He's very grounded. He spends his time renovating the house, but over the course of the stay, he realizes how difficult it is. It has moisture and black mold spreading everywhere, and it has one room upstairs that can't be unlocked. There's one storm that blows out the windows and knocks down a giant chandelier. He even finds an entire skeleton inside one of the walls and has to call the police. Basically, the house is a supernatural nightmare as well as a practical, infrastructural nightmare. Olivia, or Liv, is an architect, and while she's helping map out the house, she's also working on her Forever Home project, and she tells the kids they'll build it once they sell Hill House. She's very bright and imaginative, and together she and Hugh do a really good job at parenting. However, she's increasingly plagued with migraines, loss of time, and worsening hallucinations. Meanwhile, the children are also experiencing their own terrors. Steve witnesses his mother's mental decline and his father's frustration with the house. Shirley says prophetic things in her sleep, and she finds abandoned kittens and gets traumatized when none of them survive, even with her parenting. Theo realizes that she can see things whenever she touches objects or people, so she starts wearing gloves. Eleanor, who goes by Nell, is plagued with sleep paralysis and hallucinations of what she calls the bent neck lady. Luke sees a variety of things in the house, including a tall man with a bowler hat and a zombie. Besides the main family, there's also Mr. and Mrs. Dudley, who are the caretakers of the house And there is a mysterious little girl on the premises named Abigail who becomes friends with Luke. Although Luke tells his family about her, nobody thinks that she's real. In the modern day, we see that Hugh Crane is older and alone. He speaks to himself and takes medication for his heart. He's nearly estranged from his children now. We learn this is because Liv was found dead inside Hill House, the same night that Hugh had woken up all of his children and drove them away to a motel. And although the police declare that she took her own life, very few of them believe their father is innocent. As an adult, Stephen has gone on to write horror novels, including one where he tries to recount the events that took place in Hill House decades ago, despite himself not believing in the supernatural. Yes, this book is called The Haunting of Hill House. Shirley runs a funeral home with her husband. She's very no-nonsense and responsible, although sometimes she can be a huge hypocrite. Theo, the sarcastic and witty one, lives in Shirley's guest house and works as a child therapist. Her main struggle in the show is just trying to grapple with the concept of romantic commitment. Luke suffers from drug addiction and has spent most of his adult life in and out of rehab, to the annoyance of his older siblings. As for Nell, when the series starts, she's already in a poor mental state due to the recent untimely death of her husband. So that's an overview of the vibe of this family. Let's go through everybody's specific relationships because they're all strained. Shirley, yes, they named a character after Shirley Jackson. Shirley is constantly mad at Steve for using their Hill House trauma for profit by publishing The Haunting of Hill House. She also resents him for offering to share the royalties with her and the others, and so she refuses to take any money from him. Steve himself admits that he doesn't believe in ghost stories and that he never experienced anything paranormal in Hill House, and that everybody in his family except for him is mentally ill. Steve's not in good standing with his wife either, as they're recently separated. Theodora is skeptical towards everyone. She's the one who tries to stay in her own lane, and she and Shirley probably have the closest adult sibling relationships we see in the family. It's revealed later on in the series that she has secretly taken Steve's royalties. Shirley does not know this. Nell and Luke are obviously super close due to them being twins. They even hint at them having some kind of twin telepathy between each other, but as adults they rarely interact with each other. Luke is either off to rehab or roaming the streets, and all of his siblings have pretty much given up on him entirely after him struggling with addiction for a decade. To be fair, Luke has also lied and stolen money from them in the past. Still, into adulthood, Nell remained the only one who really believed in him the most, and she constantly encouraged him to try to become sober. As for everyone's relationship with Nell, all of her older siblings agree that she's emotionally unstable, but none of them seem to make much time for her, nor try and stay updated on her life. Some of them also live in different states. It's hard to keep track of exactly where everybody is. Hugh is the only one who lives all the way out in Florida. Of course, though, as I mentioned, most of the Crane children don't talk to their father. Steve swears the man is crazy, that he's suspicious, and that he's irresponsible. Nell is the only one who seems closer to him and actually has frequent phone calls with him and writes letters to him. They do all have positive and bittersweet memories of their late mother. Everyone has their own idealized version of her in their own heads that kind of haunts them through the show. So those are the relationships. In addition to that context, let's look at the major plot points that happen in the episodes of the show. Episode 1. There's a flashback to that night where Hugh has to get all of his kids out of Hill House, and it's also the night where Liv dies. This flashback is from Stephen's perspective, and the only thing that we see is Hugh picking Stephen up, telling him to close his eyes, and Stephen sees some woman running down behind them in the hallway. In present day, we get a general idea of everyone's personality. Steve is talking to a fan about his book, Theo is into club, Shirley is doing her funeral home stuff, etc., etc. Both Steve and Shirley get a call from Nell, but both of them are too busy to answer the phone. Finally, Nell calls Hugh and tells him that the bent neck lady is back. She lies and says that she's at home, so Hugh says that he'll take a flight to come see her. The camera pans out and we see that Nell is actually back at a very dilapidated Hill House, one that has not been renovated, so we know that something happened to prevent the Cranes from actually fully flipping the house. We see Nell in a dress somehow dancing alone in the halls of Hill House. Then there's a moment where exactly at 3:03 everyone wakes up gasping for breath and Shirley says Nell is in the red room. Cut to another scene where Steve is entering his apartment building to see Luke, who has stolen some of his electronics. Steve gives Luke some money instead, and so Luke apologizes for breaking into his place. Then Steve goes into his apartment, suddenly sees Nell in the corner, He chats with her, scolds her for letting Luke steal his stuff, but she doesn't say anything. Then Steve gets a call from his father telling him that Nell is dead inside of Hill House, and we get a great scare at the end of the episode. Episode 2. We get some insight into what Shirley does as a mortuary owner. She has flashbacks to childhood of her trying to take care of the kittens. We also learn that part of the reason Shirley and Steve are so annoyed with Luke is that they're both helping pay for him to stay in a rehab facility that costs $6,000 a month. There's a flashback where Luke checks into the rehab center, everyone says goodbye to him, says really encouraging stuff to him. So that's the first time that we see all of the siblings in one room. Back to current day. Steve has to shakily call Shirley and tell her about Nell's death, which his father told him was because she took her own life. Shirley is in shock, and she goes to tell Theo. All of them are pissed off that Hugh is, once again, not giving them all of the details when a family member dies. Even though he has told them multiple times that Hill House is responsible, none of them believe it. Shirley makes the horrible decision to embalm her own sister and host the funeral. Theo is rightly concerned that no one's going to have time to properly grieve, but there's no sense in telling Shirley anything. On top of this, Luke has mysteriously disappeared from rehab and no one can contact him to tell him about Nell's death. We get a scene where Shirley is literally fixing up Nell's body and she tells her siblings that her neck was broken. So we know, in theory, how she took her own life. Shirley has a flashback to Nell's wedding day. This time Hugh is there and all of the siblings besides Luke are there. Luke had shown up to attend Nell's wedding, but Shirley literally paid him to leave and not disrupt things. It's so infuriating. He never got to see her get married. In the morgue, Shirley sees her mother. Cue end of the episode, scary moment. Episode 3. This episode focuses on Theo and how she slowly realized that she had psychic sensitivities. In the current day, she actually uses this ability sometimes to help her figure out what's bothering the children that she sees for therapy. This episode is when we actually find out that Theo secretly took Steve's offer so that she could use the book royalties to get her PhD to study child psychology. There's another very cute flashback to Nell's wedding.
Toast were supposed to be 10 minutes ago.
I'm sorry. I'm ready.
It's okay, yeah. Come on.
I want to check your makeup. I want to see who's in there.
It's gotta be Henry.
Oh, my money's on math.
What?
We didn't know you were into...
Bridesmaids?
I love you.
Theo seems the most bitter and angry at learning about Nell's death, especially how it relates to the way that they all know their mother died. There's a flashback to when Theo was a child where her mother explains that the women in their family are supernaturally gifted. Back to the present day. Theo goes to Shirley's morgue to touch Nell's body and figure out what she saw. Episode 4, Luke's episode. There are some scenes of him in rehab befriending a random girl that pretty much has no relevance to the story. To anyone who's seen the show or is going to watch the show soon, this man's speech is so creepypasta, it's almost comical. I couldn't take it seriously. I don't know what they were thinking putting that in there. Luke is 90 days clean when suddenly his friend ditches rehab and he also escapes to try and find her. He spends the entire episode on the streets looking for her. He breaks into Steve's apartment because he tries to get money to help his friend get clean in a hotel somewhere, which is the moment when Steve finds him from episode 1. The entire time his neck hurts and he's cold and stiff for some reason, obviously because of the link that he has with his twin sister who is now dead. His friend ends up stealing his money and disappearing. She never pops back up in the series. Then he gets beaten up and robbed of his clothes before Steven finally finds him. Also in the episode are flashbacks of young Luke getting this bowler hat, and later he sees this gangly ghost searching the house for the hat. A version of this ghost has followed him into the present day, especially when he's out alone on the streets and cold and tired. It was a really good creep factor. I think this imagery is what sticks in my head when I think about The Haunting of Hill House. But then it turns into his mom, so that's just weird. Anyway, at the end of the episode, Luke tells Steve that he doesn't think Nell ended her own life. Episode 5 is a Nell episode. She's been seeing the bent neck lady since childhood. To address this, she goes to a sleep therapist who ends up becoming her husband. He helps her through her sleep paralysis episodes until one night he straight up dies of a freak aneurysm. Nell contributes this to the doing of the bent neck lady. In a flashback, young Nell gets in trouble for writing on the walls in the house, but Nell insists that she didn't do it. It just says, "Come home, Nell." And it's behind the wallpaper, which is strange. In a different flashback, right before dropping off Luke at his $6,000 rehab facility, he forces his sister to buy him drugs one more time, which obviously disappoints her. The entire time she's trying to hint at how unhappy she's been since her husband freakishly died, but even Luke isn't really listening to her. As he's using, she sees the bent neck lady again. She is at least routinely seeing a therapist who is named Dr. Montague, but he's not doing much at all for her mental health. She eventually stops taking her medication and she decides to confront Hill House on her own. She gets a hotel room, gets tormented by the bent neck lady again, and so she goes to Hill House in the middle of the night, which is when she made that call to Hugh Crane. This is the saddest scene in the entire show. Yeah, I cried, okay. Nell goes into Hill House, which is all lit up for her. Inside, it's fully renovated somehow with a warm, welcoming atmosphere. Of course, we get cuts to real life where it's empty and dark, but that's not what Nell sees at all. She's seeing memories from childhood and her parents and her siblings. Her mom at some point writes, "Welcome home, Nell," on the wall. Then all of her loved ones tell her that they love her and that they should listen to her more and believe in her more. Then she sees her deceased husband somehow and she dances with him through the empty house. It's so sad. It's so sad that this is what she needed to feel happy. She's not asking for much. I mean, okay, yes, her husband cannot be brought back to life. That's truly not possible. But to fantasize that her siblings apologize to her and just tell her that they're going to start listening to her, that's all she really wanted. Then her mother lures her up the staircase with the promise of a tea party, and Nell suddenly realizes that she's over the edge of the staircase railing with a rope around her neck. She doesn't want this, obviously, so she panics, but the spirit of her mother forces her to fall. It was murder! It was ghost murder! Then we get an amazing sequence where she drops through time and it's revealed that she's been the woman that she's been seeing for her entire life. Since childhood, she was being haunted by the image of her own future death. Episode 6 is my favorite episode. This is the viewing. Everyone in the family gathers in Shirley's funeral home, and this is the first time that we truly have every family member in the same building. This scene is terrifying. The building is way too open and spacious, and the camera slowly travels and rotates, so I kept trying to watch the corner of every shot to see if anything was hiding in it. The color grading is really awesome. Everything feels soft and saturated. Predictably, everyone tries to deny blame and point fingers and argue over how mentally ill Nell was, and how mentally ill their mother probably was, and how mentally ill they all might be. Theo is over drinking, Shirley is trying to keep up appearances, Steve is complaining about how broken their family is, and how they all need help. Luke is generally distraught, and Hugh can barely speak above a whisper about how Hill House is to blame for all of it. He says that even though he tried to protect them from it, he just couldn't. It's messy. Hugh still sees them all as the children that he's desperately trying to save from an evil house that killed his wife. Steve is pissed off at him for hiding the truth. Shirley is pissed at Steve, and Theo reveals that not only has she been taking the money from the books, but Shirley's own husband has been secretly accepting the royalties as well to keep their funeral business afloat. Also, this doesn't get fully explained until, like, the last episode, but I'm just gonna go ahead and lump it in here because it doesn't really change much. Shirley cheated on her husband once with some random man from a conference. Everyone tries to dissect Nell's life and figure out what went wrong. While they're arguing, Shirley looks over and realizes that somebody has put buttons on her eyes, which is terrifying. They're all yelling at each other when suddenly Nell's entire casket falls over. At this point, Theo and Shirley's husband have gone to get more alcohol from the basement, and Shirley finds them, like, embracing each other or something. I don't understand. Anyway, now there's animosity between Shirley and Theo. This episode, we also get a ton of flashbacks to the huge storm that broke some of the windows back when they were staying in Hill House. Well, during that storm, there's a moment where Nell completely goes missing, and so the entire family has to split up to try and find her. She pops back up, and when they ask her where she went, she explains that she was there the entire time, in the same spot. It's a very amazing and very sad ending to the episode. Clearly an obvious parallel to what's currently happening in present day.
I was right here. I was right here the whole time. None of you could see me. Nobody could see me.
Episode 7. In the present day, they're having a funeral for Nell, and everyone is trying to pick themselves back up, even though tensions are still high. We see that Hugh has full-on hallucinations of Liv, who talks to him constantly. He has a flashback to the day where he was questioned by the police, who briefly mentioned that there were 2 bodies found in Hill House that night. In the far past, the episode covers the renovation nightmare that Hugh goes through, including the skeleton that he finds of Mr. Hill himself, who had walled himself in alive. A very fun nod to the original book. One night he wakes up to find Liv holding a screwdriver to his neck, seemingly asleep. Then he has to show her that her architectural drawings have become odd. She's scribbling in the shape of her forever house inside the diagram. So they both agree that for her health, she needs to leave Hill House for a few days. After the present-day funeral, Theo and Hugh are in the funeral home when suddenly they see like a horrible apparition of her crawling towards them, which makes Theo finally believe in the supernatural evil that Hill House has been haunting them with. At the end of the episode, Luke steals Shirley's wallet and Theo's car and heads to Hill House. Episode 8 picks up right after that. Steve and Hugh drive around to look for Luke, and after realizing that he's going to burn the house down, Shirley and Theo would head towards the house as well. Steve remembers a time where he found his mother talking to an empty room. Then, after fixing up a vanity for her, one that's fully covered in mold, by the way, he witnesses his mother suddenly smashing the mirror. In a different flashback, Mrs. Dudley also gave the kids some insight on the Hill family and how Mr. and Mrs. Hill met while they were both at an asylum. Like, okay, meet cute at the institute, let's go. In the present day, Steve and his father finally talk about the house. Steve tells Hugh that their family is plagued with mental illness, and that's why he personally got a vasectomy and didn't tell his wife about it, and that's kind of why he's divorced right now a little bit. Hugh was like, bro, what? He also gives a great speech about being in a relationship and having an argument and just working together with their significant other.
You're on the same team even when you're in the middle of the fight. During the fight, you're forgiven. There's no fear, there's no danger, you're safe. I hope really you get to experience that sometime, because it's a beautiful way to be.
Hugh is based. Hugh is so based. I like his character a lot. He talks about mental health, he goes to therapy, he tries to be there for his children. He's a little bit emotionally broken, that's fine, but all of his kids hate his guts. But he's trying. Steve reveals that he knows about the police report, so he knows that Liv apparently had thrown herself off the staircase in the library, and the report also said that she had bruises and a broken ankle even before the fall, as if she had been in a fight. He accuses Hugh of being super suspicious and withholding information. Again, Hugh tells Steve that Hill House is evil, and their family is like an unfinished meal to that house. Then he finally tells Steve, you saw things that didn't exist in the house.
I never built you kids a treehouse.
What? Luke was in there all the time? I used to go fetch him for dinner.
Flipping a house. We were gonna be there maybe 8 weeks. How would I even have the time to build you kids a goddamn treehouse? And that house is the most dangerous place in the world for all of us.
Finally, Steve becomes a little bit more convinced that the house isn't normal. Meanwhile, Theo and Shirley are also having their own paranormal heart-to-heart because a few scenes ago they experienced disembodied knocking and banging while in the funeral home. Now, in the car, they argue about Theo and Shirley's husband, and then Nell's ghost suddenly pops out between them and screams. This one got me good. I'm not gonna lie. It scared me the first time I watched the show, and it scared me the second time around because I forgot it happened. Theo has to do this long, overacted scene where she tells Shirley that she didn't kiss Shirley's husband. She felt so empty after touching Nell that she's been numb ever since. I don't know. It's a weird plotline. It's weak character motivation for me. I'm just not convinced that this was the best way to illustrate Theo feeling empty. I don't know. At the end of the episode, Luke gets to the house and all the lights turn red, like it's some sort of animal putting up a threatening display. He pours gasoline all around the main lobby, but when he throws the match, the house freaking neutralizes the fire. How is that possible? Then some ghost grabs him. Episode 9. After the one giant storm in the house, Liv is helping Mrs. Dudley clean up broken glass, and she tells her a story about stones raining down on her house after her father died. She keeps getting migraines and losing track of time. There's a moment where she straight up has a vision of both Nell and Luke as adults dead on a morgue table, and she recognizes them as her children. One night she sees a ghost of Poppy Hill, the original mistress of the house, who gives her a whole speech about children and protecting them. She keeps talking about bad dreams and how if Liv saw her children dead in adulthood, then she needs to find out a way to wake them up from that bad dream. It's giving American Horror Story, I'm not gonna lie. After this, she wakes up with the screwdriver to her husband's throat. Then she tries to tuck the twins into bed one night, and they start asking her all these terrifying questions.
What if I dream that you sent us away and my heart breaks right in half until I'm on a silver table? Is my jaw wired shut? And what if I'm so sad that I put poison in me until my blood turns into poison and my body breaks down? And it was you that killed us because you sent us out there in the night, in the dark.
But then Steve catches her talking to an empty room, and by the time she turns around, suddenly it's daytime and she's very confused. Mrs. Dudley has a conversation with her about protective parenting and never letting your guard down in case the evil world gets its hands into innocent children. I was like, Mrs. Dudley, you are not helping. But then Mrs. Dudley also tells her that she should leave the house for a while. When Steve gives her that vanity, in the mirror she saw Nell and Luke, which is why she had punched the mirror. One night, Hugh finally convinces her that she needs to head to her sister's house for a few days, just for her own mental well-being, so she leaves Hill House that night. Before she leaves, Luke asks her if Abigail can stay the night. Again, nobody thinks that Abigail is real, so she's just like, yeah, whatever, sure. Liv pretends to leave the house, but ends up going to a motel room and sitting there in the dark by herself, and she ends up just sneaking back into Hill House that night. She is not well. Shirley finds her in the kitchen making tea. Liv then goes into the twins' room and tells them that they're having a tea party. She even invites Abigail, who has been revealed to be a real child. So she's made this tea with rat poison, so she can help the children and herself wake up from the bad dream. I guess she doesn't really care about her older kids, huh? Like, she just does not care. The climax of the episode is when she reveals that the Red Room door is open, and she tells Nell that their family is the key to the door. They go inside, and meanwhile Hugh realizes what's happening, so he runs around the house trying to find them. Abigail is the first kid to drink the tea, and of course she immediately gets poisoned, which is when Hugh runs through the door and attacks his wife so that the kids can run away. And this is also when he starts gathering up his kids and putting them in the car so that he can take them away from the house and their mother, who is having some kind of murderous episode. While Hugh is planning his escape, he sees a ton of ghosts around the house. Poppy Hill sees him taking kids outside, so she's whispering things into Liv's ear. We get the scene of Hugh running with Steve, and it's Liv who's limping after them in the hallway. The only option Liv says that she has left is to wake herself up, so that's why she heads to the top of the staircase, and Poppy tells her to jump off, and so this is where Hugh ends up finding her. Episode 10, the final episode, has a lot. Steve, Luke, Shirley, and Theo are all in Hill House, trapped inside of the Red Room. All of them are stuck inside of their own hallucinations. Steve is in his house with a pregnant wife who insults him about the ethics of his writing. Shirley's isn't really an illusion, but it's just a repressed memory of her cheating with another married man at a conference. Theo has an illusion where she's stuck in bed with a ton of grimy hands all over her. In all of their dreams, Nell shows up at the end to help pull them out of it, which is how they wake up and realize it isn't real. Except for Luke. Luke imagines that he finally found his random friend, except she forcefully injects him with drugs. But somehow in real life, this isn't an illusion, he's actually dying. So how did this happen? Either way, they have to work to resuscitate him, while Liv pulls him into this fantasy where they're having the tea party together. Nell saves Luke from that fantasy, and in the room, they all finally get to see her and talk to her. Her speech is out of place at first, and then at some point Shirley says something, and Nell is able to snap into the moment with them. She explains to them that time in Hill House is non-linear, and it falls on you like confetti. She explains that the Red Room was never locked at all. In fact, all of them had used the room for different things in different scenes throughout the series. The house was just like shape-shifting the rooms to be whatever they wanted it to be. She says that the Red Room is like the house's stomach. It's where it tries to digest all of them. Nell says that she isn't gone, she's just scattered into pieces. Everyone apologizes to her, and so she accepts their apology, but you can tell that she's still a little bit delusional about the house. She's still talking about it like it's some great awe-inspiring creature rather than a monster that killed her and her mother. Plus, I don't know, I think this one 5-minute scene was like a very easy resolution for somebody who was genuinely having a mental health crisis for most of her life, and her siblings didn't really do much to support her, but she just forgives them really quickly in this scene. So this is happening while Hugh is actually outside of the Red Room, and the ghost of Liv finds him and talks to him.
Journeys end in lovers' meeting.
Hugh tries to convince her to let the children leave the house unharmed, and she explains that she's just trying to save all of them.
You kept them from me, and they suffered.
And even if they're broken or addicted or joyless, or yes, even if they die, we have to watch it all because we're parents and we bear witness.
It's a horror.
It doesn't have to be.
Nothing bad will ever touch them ever again.
Nothing good will either.
I won't let you take them away again. They'll die.
They will die if they stay. They're dying now. Our babies are dying.
It's a really good back and forth debate on the anxieties that a parent has versus just having to let your children go out and get hurt and learn from them getting hurt. Liv says that she just doesn't want to be alone anymore, so Hugh promises her that he will be with her forever if she agrees to let the kids go. The Red Room door opens, Hugh and Steve work to get Luke out of the house, and then we see Steve stopping to look at something, but they all make it out of the house safely. Theo and Shirley drive Luke to the hospital, while Steve stays behind to talk to his dad. Turns out he saw Hugh's body on the staircase, so he knows that Hugh is currently a spirit. He's like, what the hell, Dad? What happened? Hugh shows him the final events of what happened that night in Hill House years ago. The Dudleys show up to find Hugh holding his wife, and it's revealed that Abigail was their daughter, who had snuck out of their house to have the sleepover with Luke. I guess they just never, mentioned Abigail to the Cranes because they were like, well, we don't want our kid involved with this house. This house is kind of evil. There's a scene where Mr. Dudley says that his wife, Mrs. Dudley, had at some point lost a baby, and while working at Hill House for most of her life, she had sworn of hearing her own babies cry throughout the house. So basically that couple does not mess with Hill House in the night, in the dark. And it's tragic because it didn't work. Abigail is now dead inside of the house, and they see her spirit, so the Dudleys beg Hugh Crane to never finish renovating the house, just leave it, lock it up, and in return, they'll make sure that nobody ever trespasses in the house. Back in the present, Ghost Hugh heads up to the Red Room to stay for eternity with Liv and Nell.
You and your sisters and your brother. Never been prouder of anything, ever. Take care of each other.
Dad, and be kind to each other. I was so lucky to be your dad.
Yeah, okay, sure. I cried. Yeah, whatever. I bawled my eyes out. Steve walks through Hill House with all of its ghosts behind him, and he doesn't look back. Safe to say he's now a believer in the paranormal. Luke eventually gets better. We see him celebrating 2 years of sobriety. Shirley confesses to her husband about cheating, and I assume their marriage is stronger. Theodora finally starts dating that one situationship that she had. Steve just kind of continues writing, I guess. What got me again, weeping, crying, sliding down the wall, was Mr. Dudley at the end carrying Mrs. Dudley to the house before she dies, and then she dies on the property and she turns into a ghost and she's reunited with her baby and Abigail. Yeah, it's a beautiful, bittersweet moment. And Steve is doing a voiceover about fear is the relinquishment of logic, but love is the relinquishment of logic or some shit. All of it was sad. All of it was so sad and beautiful and gorgeous. The end. I love so much about the Haunting of Hill House TV series. The color grading, the intro is beautiful. The set design of the house itself has a great mixture of extravagance and realism. The environmental storytelling, where you have this ancient house with lavish decorations, but then the family moves in and they have like very shoddily put together like 90s children's beds. You can just tell that they're supposed to be there temporarily. It's really nice. Even the detail where the family moves in and they're all wearing like very cheerful, bright colored early 90s outfits, but by the end of their time in the house, their wardrobes have all slowly changed into these like dull, plain colored, old-timier things. Especially Liv. She just starts wearing like long gowns and stuff. There are a lot of nods to the original book and even other adaptations. The first episode starts with the opening paragraph to the original book. Nell has a scene where she finds a teacup with stars, and Mrs. Dudley gives her the "insist on your cup of stars" speech. It's ironically the same teacup that her mother tries to poison her with. Mrs. Dudley also gives them, of course, the "in the night in the dark" speech. Theo says a line about throwing a rock through a greenhouse roof, which is from the original book. At some point, she's also seen reading The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Liv's speech about stones raining on their house, that's from the book. The house, of course, has to have stone lions in the front. Nell's therapist being named Dr. Montague. There's a scene where Theo is holding Nell's hand, but then she wakes up and she's like, well, who was holding my hand? That's a scene from the book, even though it's like flipped around. I like the lion doorknob. That was the detail used in the first movie in 1963. There's even like one reference to a fireplace flue, like the stupid flue in The Haunting 1999. And obviously, it's a horror series, so we can't not talk about how good the scares are. The footsteps moving inside of an inaccessible locked room, Nell's jump scare in Steve's apartment, Liv telling the children that the porch light flashing means they have to come back home when it gets dark. Then that's shown in the tiny diorama in Shirley's office, and when Nell reaches Hill House. The insanely random jump scare where Hugh is talking to the kids, that scared me so badly when I first watched the show. The backwards floating hat man, mwah, beautiful, love the concept. Theo and Shirley arguing in the car and Nell jumping out in between them, wonderful. Poppy Hill looking ghostly in one shot and then normal in the next shot, wonderful. There are also some ridiculous moments though. I'm not a person who finds zombies scary, so those creepy moments were lost on me. And Mr. Smiley, we didn't need Mr. Smiley. So much that I didn't even bother explaining the entire context of Mr. Smiley. Like, we needed the story, we didn't need his jump scare. The Hat Man turning into the mother was like a little bit ridiculous, I'll be honest. Just small stuff that maybe the show could have done without, but I understand why they were there. Some other criticisms. I don't think Poppy Hill was necessary for the story. I understand that she made a great antagonist that helped Liv's mental decline make sense, but I don't think the story needed a bad guy at all. The ambiguity of the house itself is scary enough. Once it starts plopping real ghosts into the narrative, I felt myself being pulled out of it. Also, the series was made in 2018, so I'm still surprised that so much of the story kind of fell into the women be crazy about children trope. So the show's message seems to be take care of each other, love each other, be more open and honest to those around you. But the actual content of the show was, if you are living in a haunted house, then no amount of love and care will prevent you from going crazy, because ghosts are whispering into your ears. So those two kind of things felt disjointed. It's hard to make this a story about mental health when genuinely evil things are happening as well. These are people who lived in a house with black mold and stale air, with an actual skeleton inside of it, but also the house had hostile ghosts, and the people who built the house were mentally ill, but also their family was broken apart in adulthood because they were all just unhappy. I understand the show wanted to deliver important themes about mental wellness, but it almost dampens its own objective. Nell was emotionally fragile, she wasn't supported enough, and she died. But she was killed by a phantom of her mother who herself was killed by ghosts, and she was trapped in a haunted house, only to instantly forgive everyone at the end and also seemingly forgive the house too at the end. I still see all of the events as an unnecessary tragedy. Although the ending is amazing, it shows us that good growth can come out of unnecessary tragedy. Also, how much did Hill House truly interfere with their lives? How come her husband died so suddenly? Was that really just like a freak accident? How come Luke's friend disappeared so suddenly? When Liv saw those visions of her kids There's no way Poppy Hill can show her the future, so is she really like tortured by her own psychic intuition, or is Poppy doing that somehow? I find it difficult to really dissect what The Haunting of Hill House says about mental health, fate, tragedy, and family. Maybe, like most of Shirley Jackson's work, there are no clear morals or messages. There's just the narrative and what happens according to circumstance. Either way, the story was compelling and bittersweet and heartbreaking and lovely. Leave a comment and let me know how you personally interpreted it. Alright, conclusions. The Haunting of Hill House novel affected me a lot. I have had the worst year of my entire life. I mean, I'm only like 24, so there's plenty of room for worse, but I'll say that this series was really cathartic for me to read. When I think about Eleanor Vance, the book character, I see myself. It was a slap in the face for me to get to the end of The Haunting of Hill House and realize how many similarities I had with her. Stuck at home with family who you don't really get along with that well. Like Eleanor, you learn to carry the beliefs of those who raised you, and you're pressured into maintaining that image even into adulthood. Even when you should be figuring out your own identity, constantly putting yourself down, constantly bullying yourself, feeling super lost in life, and getting obsessed with what other people think about you. I'm just as aimless as she was. I don't have my own place. I still stay at home. I don't have any real financial security thanks to the shitty job market and the ever-looming collapse of capitalism. I've been deeply depressed. I have had plenty of dark thoughts. I think Eleanor Vance had a lot of repressed anger, and she couldn't even let herself express it because she smothered anything that she felt was too real. She wouldn't let herself be messy, and because of that, she couldn't let herself be a person. People weren't really listening to her, people weren't paying attention to her, even though she was clearly upset, and she just wanted the world to make some room for her. It hurt to realize that at some point she was also making herself miserable. And I know what it's like to feel like a ghost in your own life. I understand the urge to be perfect. I understand the urge to make yourself feel evil and stupid and embarrassing just for being vulnerable and human. But I'm here to say that shit is torture. You are rotting yourself from the inside out if you do this, and it will make you go insane. Eleanor bottled up her emotions to the point where the only other direction that she could go was hurtling straight towards a tree. Obviously, the people around her did not help because they weren't really paying attention to her. But the misery that she was also putting on herself didn't help either. I'm glad to have read The Haunting of Hill House because it helped me realize the exact reasons why I'm fighting not to end up like Eleanor Vance. I'm not doomed by the narrative. Sorry girl, I love you, but couldn't be me. Though I have had really dark thoughts in the past, I also have a very small but very strong network of support. Friends who care about me, and family who surprise me with small gestures of kindness when I'm not expecting them. Strangers who smile and make small talk. Hell, even past school teachers who are still rooting for me. And a great therapist to help me work through everything. That's probably the most important. And even if somebody out there doesn't have any of those things, the amount of amazing resources online, that exists too. So I'm gonna put some links in the description. Just know that for me, this shit hit home really hard. So friends, whatever personal Hill House that you find yourself stuck in, you gotta get out of it. You don't gotta live in it. I think the TV series shows us that genuinely we can be haunted by a lot of stuff. It may even follow us. It may linger, but we don't gotta live in it. I don't have to, and you don't have to. Because we deserve a good fucking ending. Okay, thank you for letting me be encouraging and cheesy and tell you that your life matters, because it really does. I just think sometimes we all need to remind each other of that fact. So, thank you for watching. Please take care of yourself and your loved ones. I will see you in the next video.